Hello and welcome folks to Agathos Flight School. Today with a little different video in the new year, and I want to explain how to set up IL2 for virtual reality so that at the same time you have a nice image quality and good spotting and good performance. Why I think this is necessary? Very simple, because from what I've experienced, IL2 of the 3 flight simulations I play in virtual reality is the most tricky to set up. Why that is? Because, very simple, War Thunder and even DCS are for the most part GPU limited. Yes, in DCS you might run into some CPU issues, but most of the time, if you encounter FPS drops, you can overcome them by simply reducing the quality of the image, reducing supersampling, and then you will be fine. That's a little different in IL2, because in most situations on multiplayer maps, on large offline maps, when you fly around, the limit is actually not your GPU but your CPU, which cannot deliver enough data to give you a constant 19 FPS. Which brings me to the first decision you have to do when you want to play IL2 in virtual reality. There are 3 ways to play IL2 in virtual reality and have fun, in my eyes. First is aim for steady 19 FPS with asynchronous space warp disabled. Second, 45 FPS with asynchronous space warp enabled, or 45 FPS without asynchronous space warp. For me, the 2 later options were not really suitable. Why? Very simple, because with 45 FPS, even with asynchronous space warp activated, you will see quality issues like ghosting, etc., and all that makes spotting also a little difficult. And so and in the long term, for me, I also do not really feel comfortable with 45 FPS, and so after a while testing that out, also, which means if you use asynchronous space warp with IL2, you will have to really use a little modification you can download on the IL2 forums. You will find the link in the mod subsection, because if you have the propeller disk displayed, IL2 will produce some artifacts if you run asynchronous space warp, which does not really look nice. And so, as I'm not someone who really likes to use mods, after a while I decided, okay, we will try to aim for 90 FPS, as you see up there in that corner. And the first decision then was, okay, I need to upgrade my gaming rig. Upgrading my gaming rig was really easy, because back last year I had an i5 2500 with a GTX 970, which is not really good nowadays, and so it was easy to upgrade. My first idea was, okay, I need a solid single-thread CPU, and let's see what is in the budget. And it looked like a used i7-4790K would be a good choice, and so I went for that. I then was also lucky to be able to shoot a GTX 1080 completely new, which was one last example somewhere in a shop for half the price. And I then played IL2. You saw the videos, those are the 2 latest I have posted last year. And I had a solid performance. But performance still suffered. And that might be because the memory speed with that i7-4790K was just DDR3 1600. So I looked around what would be a good memory speed, and 2400 megahertz looked good. And so I looked what the prices are and discovered, ooh, they're pretty high. And also I tried to overclock my 4790K a little bit, and found that it's rather difficult to cool that generation of Intel CPUs. And with Xmas going by, I decided then, okay, get rid of that used rig and start all over new again. What I kept was the GPU, the GTX 1080, but I bought then a new board with a Z370 chipset, which is also ready to run the latest latest Intel Generation 9000 series, but I decided currently my budget is a little lower. I will go with a budget CPU, and what I did was I bought an i3 8350K. The good thing about that i3 is very simple. It already runs at the basic clock speed of 4 GHz and can easily be overclocked. And mine is currently running at 4.5 GHz, pretty stable. And it is easily be cooled compared to the 4790K before. With a rather inexpensive air cooler, I can keep the temperatures of that CPU at 4.5 GHz and at 60 degrees. Most of the time even lower. And so, yeah, that looks good. And with that, I played around a little bit with IL2 now, and I'm very surprised at the performance. Alongside that i3, I have 3000 MHz DDR4 memory, which I think is the lowest speed you should aim for, because memory in IL2 also plays a role. With this, I'm now just, with that basic line, I decided, okay, now I will aim for that 19 FPS. The first decision I made was I did not go with a high supersampling setting. Why? That is very simple. If you take a look at how spotting and graphic mechanics work in IL2, it's such a way you have a bubble of 10 kilometers around your plane, and outside of those 10 kilometers, no plane is drawn. Once a plane comes to that 10 kilometers boundary, it will be drawn. Usually at 10 to 9 kilometers, it might only be 1, 2, 3 pixels, depending on the size of the plane. But there is the issue if you go with a very high supersampling setting. That single pixel, those few pixels might simply be blending with the aroundish sky, etc., and you will have a difficult time. And so with the GTX 1080 powering my rig, I decided I will only go for a supersampling setting of rather low 1.12, which in SteamVR translates to 124% resolution with Oculus Rift. This has two advantages. First, it does not really interfere with the pixel size of far distance objects, and on the positive side, already increases slightly the image quality, so especially instruments are easily readable. And then I hopped into IL2 itself, and that's where we are now. And here we will go through the graphic settings. And you can see here, I have experimented with those 3 presets. Finally, I settled on high preset because for some very odd reason I found out that high preset, or at least on my rig, seems to give better performance than balanced. Low, on the other hand, will give more performance, but as in most situations, the GPU is not your limit, but the CPU. Low does not play a real role, and so I decided to go with high. Then I use for the screen resolution my desktop resolution. There's some argument that if you set that lower, you will squeeze out a little bit extra performance, but I decided that will just be fine as it is. Shadows quality I can run high. Mirrors I've set off because they seem to interfere with solid performance. I've set distance landscape detail to 4, so I have a solid spotting against distant background. If you have a lower graphic card, you can go with 2 or something like that. I've set my horizontal draw distance to 70 kilometers. That's far enough. And also, if you put more distance there, this usually gets you closer at the point where your GPU will be the bottleneck and no longer the CPU. Landscapes filter is a decision I made. I use sharp because in that way I can easily identify my landscape, can navigate on large maps, but probably for better spotting you should set that to blurred. I go with a better quality and I like the image better with sharp. Grass quality normal, but that is something we will get back in a few minutes when I show you what you should do in the startup CFG. Clouds quality high, very important. You should use, that's one advantage of high preset and high clouds quality, is that at those settings you don't need mods at the moment when planes are blending in front of the clouds. You see, IL2 has very much the same graphics issues that War Thunder had, but no one talked about that, and I had to discover it myself. Currently, this works pretty well. If that does not work well, the mod that gets rid of the propeller disk also helps with that cloud issues. Then dynamic resolution factor is set to full. Why? Because it does not make sense to set a supersampling and then reduce the game resolution. So, and as I said, in the circumstances where you still see drops in virtual reality, it's very likely it does not have something to do with your resolution, but with your CPU and overall system, other than the GPU limiting your frames. Anti-aliasing I set to 4 because this gives a good quality of the image without much drawback. If you are on a weaker GPU, you can simply reduce that to 2. Also very important, gamma correction to 0.8, so you have a little bit more distinction contrast for the objects. If you are running with the default 1.0, you really have a hard time. On that side, full screen you don't need. Enable VR is self-explaining. And then here, this is also important, HDR is on, but there's a little tweak in the startup GFG I will show in a second. Sharpen, so you have that post-processing filter that helps a little bit with spotting. And 4K textures. This is also an interesting note for IL2. 4K textures almost have no impact on game performance, but if you don't use them, you might run into some issues. And so yes, I use those 4K textures. This is what you can do in-game. What I noticed is with the i3-835 OK, or even before with the 479 OK, I could keep the HUD on and did not have negative impact on the FPS. There, the developers did a good job, and so currently I find the advantages you have, especially on large map when you have the HUD on and see the messages teammates send, is worth the very tiny performance impact you might see. On the other hand, you can simply deactivate the HUD in-game, and then you're good to go, and you have a little tiny bit of performance increase. That brings me to the final point. When you exit the game, you should go into the game folder, select the startup CFG, and then there you will see a couple of settings. And here the most important part is that you set grass distance to 0, so you don't have any grass drawn at all. And you have to disable bloom, which is automatically enabled if you select HDR in the game, but you can disable bloom then in the startup CFG. And because the bloom offsets the advantages HDR gives to you in VR regarding to spotting. And the final stage is then you save those things. As you can see here in my files, I have multiple startup CFGs backupped. And you set the startup CFG to read only. Why? Because else the game will simply override those settings for grass and bloom if you have those in-game settings like me. And with that, you should have solid performance. And let's just do a quick look here in a takeoff in a mission with the P-47, how the image quality of the game looks. Hopefully you can see this, and you can, at least for me, if I look down there, I can clearly read the instruments. You can see I can read the tiny little writings on my wings also. I have smooth edges. I only have, you see, the grass distance is at the minimum available. You see, beyond that airstrip, there's basically nothing. I don't have issues with the propeller disc, as you can see, and overall everything here looks smooth and solid. And over there I have my 19 FPS, which really makes the experience smooth. And we can just take a little look outside, and you see this also looks nice, I think. You see a little bit shimmering at the edges, which regarding to the resolution of the Oculus, which cannot be avoided to 100%, but overall it looks good. And with that, I hope those settings will help you set up your IL2 for virtual reality so you can really enjoy the game. I wish you always happy hunting, and see you here again next time at Agathos Flight School in the future. Bye bye, folks!